Welcome to Back to the Futures, the official podcast of the Futures League, presented by 78 Sports. My name is Owen. Welcome to episode 9 of season 6. We are getting closer and closer to opening day in the Futures League. It is coming at the end of May, sooner than you think. This episode is a special one. We've got two great journalists who have been around since the late 80s. It's Howard Herman from the Berkshire Eagle and Tom King from the Nashua Telegraph. Two guys who have seen it all, from Futures League baseball to high school baseball to high school sports to college sports to pro sports. You name it, they've probably covered it. It was an honor to host this episode, and these two guys are brilliant minds in the industry. We want to get you to that interview. Before we do, please continue to keep digging in for Pete using the caption below. Thank you guys again, as always, for tuning in all season long, and please tune into this episode. You don't want to miss it. Here is Howard Herman and Tom King. We are honored to be joined by two guests here for episode 9 of season 6 of Back to the Futures. Two guys who have been telling stories in baseball and the sports world. For Tom King, it's been since 1986 at the Nashua Telegraph, and for Howard Herman, it's been since 1988 at the Berkshire Eagle. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. How we doing?
Oh, we're doing great. Thanks for inviting me.
Great, Owen. Geez, I got Howard by 2 years? That's not good.
Yeah, well, you started younger than I did.
That's probably, maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, but either way, you guys have been doing it for a long time and doing it quite well. And to get started here, I want to ask both of you. Obviously, we are coming up here on the summer and the 2023 Futures League season, which you guys have covered since its inauguration in 2011. What are you guys looking forward to most here in 2023 for the Futures League?
I'd have to say just to look at the quality of the baseball and see it just continue to get better as things progress. I think that the quality, obviously, during 2020, when all the Division I players had nowhere to go, was probably the best quality it's ever been. I'd like to see it eventually get back up to there. I think last year, 2 years ago, I thought it took a step back. I think last year it took a step forward, and I'm looking forward to taking another step forward again this year.
What I find interesting, and I see it a lot I've looked at the roster here in Pittsfield, is that the league is starting to get more recent prep school, high school graduates, but they are going to very high-powered institutions. There are 11 high school graduates on the Pittsfield roster, and all of them are going Division I. 4 of them are going to Kansas State, which, of course, is in the Big 12 is a Power 5 league, which I find really, really interesting to see.
I'm of the opposite view. I don't like that many high school graduates on a team. I don't like that many high school graduates in the league. I was around when the rule was first instituted, and it was instituted to get a player, Chris Shaw, who was from Lexington, Mass. I believe it was Lexington. And they wanted to get him into the league because he was a blue chip prospect going to Boston College. And the BC was looking for a good place for him to play close by. And he was also very draftable. And so he ended up on Nashua. And they instituted the high school rule. Now, when they first instituted the high school rule, Howard and Owen, you're only supposed to have two high school graduates. And it progressed now to the point where 12 years later, there's almost an unlimited amount. And some teams are relying on them more. And I think what happens is the organizations will go to a college and say, okay, go to a college coach and say, okay, I want, can I get this guy or this guy? And the college coach will say, sure, but we'd also like you to take this kid if you can. He's going to graduate this year. He's our top recruit, and he's going to be an incoming freshman. And we'd love to see him play at the college level because he gives them a head start, right? Gives these guys a real good head start. So in some ways, I think teams are depending on it more. I'd like to see it reversed a little bit and see a limit enforced, a better, a more stringent limit. But I don't know if we'll see that, because you want to have the opportunity for the players. And these guys, I admit, some of these guys have really played well. Prep school guys, I think, are a little different. Nashua had a prep school kid last year who ended up winning the championship for them with a home run, and you could tell he was far and above the level of a high school grad because he had played prep school ball. So I think that's a little different. But some of the high school graduates, I worry about a little bit, in terms of Nashua had a few of them in a year where they didn't make the playoffs 2 years ago, and it wasn't a very good season. You could tell that they were too young for the league. And I think that that's a danger that you don't want this league to fall into.
No, you're right. I've noted it's feast or famine with these kids.
Yep.
For example, the Brewers' number one prospect, Sal Frelick, comes out of Lexington High School.
Yeah.
And, ate up the league like nobody's business. And now,
right.
He's on the verge of, making big money in the major leagues.
Right.
In Pittsfield, I would argue to anyone that last summer, Bo Bramer, who played center field for the Pittsfield Suns, who had just come out of a Pittsfield high school and is now on the roster of Fordham, might have been the best defensive center fielder in the league, and still hit 340. Yep. Obviously, the stage was not too big for him. There were a couple of other kids I can only speak mainly for the local roster, who had trouble adjusting to it. Another player, right, who played very well, and is coming back to Pittsfield, is Derek Paris, who caught and played first base, and is now like alternating at starting catcher as a freshman at UMBC. The league was not too big for him. I agree with you, and the concern is that the more that come in, the more the league will be too big for them.
Yes, and that's the thing, is I think if you're going for the talent, if you're bringing 3 high school guys or 3 prep guys or high school grads, you are bringing them on knowing that they're probably going to be able to cut it. If you're bringing 6, 7, 8, 9, you can't be too sure of that, right? I mean, and that's the danger in my mind. But I mean, it's add a lot to the school. I mean, Shaw was the number 1 pick by the Astros. He ended up with the Giants. He made the majors briefly, all of that. And, so it works, but you've got to know that this player is a can't miss. And that's why you're bringing him in.
And the other guy from last year, Jack Goodman, is playing at Pepperdine, and I actually remember him because he played the year before in the high school state championship against a bunch of the kids from the Pittsfield area who played for the Suns. So they all got to get, it was like where your spidey senses tingling because you were playing them again. And he's another guy who stepped right in and played arguably the toughest position in baseball, as shortstop.
Right.
And he played shortstop like he was a three-year college veteran.
And I think that position, we're talking about positions up the middle. We're not talking about left field or right field or things like that. Some of the high school kids that they're bringing in, Howard Owen, are a lot of them are up the middle, key position guys. And it amazes me that they do that, and a lot of them have worked out. So
Pittsfield just lost a potential kid, Matt Lee, who plays high school baseball in Pittsfield, was going to play for the Suns, and he's going to Kansas State, but he can't play. He can't play because they want him in Manhattan at the end of June. So, and he's a high school kid who touches, not the biggest kid, but touches low 90s.
Yep.
And they want him in the weight room, and the next thing you know, he's going to be, hitting 95.
That's just it. Now, Nashua had a kid from a school that's not in my coverage area, but he played against all those kids, and he was the top pitcher in the state last year. And he came in and he just shut down opponents in the league for 2, maybe 3 starts, but he got a late start because he had to go to orientation. And then they wanted him back out there again in the middle of July, and we never saw him again. So those are the things that happen with some of these high school kids. You've got to know, and you've got to make sure that they're going to stick around, and also that they're, quality, that they can do the job. And I think that's a key. But that's what I look for this year in the league, to see the talent level even, get higher. Because I remember when it started, the philosophy was it really was a Division II, Division III league. There weren't many Division I kids in it at all. And honestly, I think some of the more hungrier players, and the players that are not as, that are more ready to play once the season starts, because their tournaments are a little earlier, are the D2, D3 kids. And they go all out, and they come in. I don't know, maybe Howard, you'd agree with this. You probably will. They come in with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. They want to prove they can play with the D1 guys. And
very much so. And
a lot of them do.
I'll give you a Pittsfield example. Caleb Spur, all-star outfielder for 2 years there, is still tearing it up at Endicott. He's going to use his extra year at UConn. So he, obviously,
Yep.
caught everybody's attention, being, having a really good couple of seasons in this league. What I've seen out of all of the New England baseball leagues writ large is that there's very little difference anymore, except with power arms and power bats. If you look at the Futures League compared to the NECBL has more power arms,
Yes,
95 guys, and power bats. And then when you compare the NECBL to the Cape, it's off the charts, because every pitcher on the Cape can touch mid to upper 90s.
right.
And they got all the power bats there. And I think, guys who play shortstop in the Futures League, regular infielders, regular catchers, middle of the rotation guys, and that type of thing, can play at any league, any summer league in New England. It's just that the big power numbers, pitching and hitting, aren't there.
True. And the thing is guys from I'm always interested when I hear that guys from this league go down to Cape Cod, and they go on a lot of them on a trial basis. And a couple of them stick, which is great for this league. So, I mean, the Futures League has been around since 2011. And I don't know when it started, and I covered it right from day one with 4 teams. And when it started, I didn't know how much long, maybe 6-7 years, maybe that's how long. And here we go all the way through to year number 12. So it is year number 12. Yeah, year number 12. So it's there are a lot of baseball players out there, and the league has a niche, and it's got a home, and it's got a good purpose, and it's thriving right now, I think.
It is, and I think the big difference between it and some of the other leagues is that it is very much run like a minor league.
That's it.
And
it's a
and
for-profit. The business title. There is, I don't know what a section, whatever.
Yeah,
whatever.
It is not like the NECBL or the Cape League, a 501c3 nonprofit corporation.
Yeah, I know there was some fancy code number for it, but they're run as a business.
But I also think,
business.
I also think that the baseball, that on the field they run it a little bit more minor league-ish than some of the other leagues.
Right, and the reason they do that, I mean, here in Nashua, they treat the players very well. The transportation's great. They find the housing, the whole bit. And the players have really, I've never heard any complaints. And obviously the reason they do the minor league stuff is to attract the fans and give the fans something besides the baseball to enjoy when they're in the stadium. So, it's surpassed my expectations totally when it first began. No doubt about it. It's really grown.
Yeah, this league has certainly turned it around, and we're definitely looking forward to 2023. And you said it, with a lot of these high school guys coming in and the talent that we've had over the last couple of years, it just shows how far the league has come in its 12 years since 2011, as you said. Let's go into some specific questions now. Howard, I'll start with you. The Suns are getting a new look in the dugout this summer with Chad Shade being named the manager. What are your expectations for him this summer?
Well, I think he's going to run the program well. He's right now a graduate assistant coach at the aforementioned Kansas State, working under Pete Hughes, who has connections to the Futures League and New England baseball writ large. It all depends on how, his players are going to have to decide. It's funny. I was covering a high school game yesterday and ran into Kevin Donati, who managed the Suns last year. And he still runs a big baseball training facility in Berkshire County. And he was watching a bunch of his players play. And we were talking, he said the hardest thing that he had to do last year was learn how to run a bullpen. That was the thing that he had the most trouble with, the entire course of the season. I would imagine that Chad, coming out of a college program where he's been helping coach, will have a much easier time of that. I'm looking, they've got a vast majority of players this year are Division I kids. So I think they're anticipating, maybe at least on paper, a pretty good season. I wait and see, because as we all know, you don't know. For example, that Pittsfield team that got to the championship game, the championship series a couple years ago, would not have put my mortgage that they would have gotten there. But that team just had it, and were one pitch away from winning the title up in Vermont.
Yeah, I felt the same way about Nashua midway through the year last year. And look you don't know, and also because there may be that one kid that catches lightning in a bottle and just all of a sudden starts to really progress for you during the second half of a year and can carry you, and the chemistry and everything else. Plus, Howard, I don't know. I mean, there are guys out there that get picked up late in the year before they freeze the rosters that make a difference too. Nashua back in 2015, 16, and 17 picked up a couple of those guys and ended up winning. They were very key down the stretch, and so the rosters change a lot, and managing a bullpen in this league is unlike doing it anywhere, because some of these teams have a ton of pitchers to start the year, and you don't know. You've got to sort them out. They have to weed themselves out, and you've got to figure out, okay, now some of them come with stipulations from their college coaches. Others are like, okay, we'll use them whatever way we can. And it takes a while for the dust to settle and for some of these teams to figure out their pitching. And the ones that do, and the ones that have it all figured out towards the end of the year, are the ones that can progress in the tournament and in the playoffs. But Nashua was down to a reliever having to start the deciding game. They ran out of pitchers. So it's fun. You never know. You can never bet on anything. Although the success that Vermont's had in their 2 years in the league has been, in my mind, unprecedented. They've just come in and dominated.
They have. It's funny. You have your staff set up, starters, relievers, and all that, and then July 20th, the college coach calls and said he's thrown enough. He's coming home, and then you've got to change, and then you've got to change on the fly. I don't know. I remember a Pittsfield Suns team that made it to the playoffs against Worcester, and their starting pitcher in the last game was a fellow named Mike Robards, who was an outfielder.
Yeah,
because they ran out. And I don't root for teams to win and lose. but I wanted that team to win because of the story.
Yep.
He's playing the outfield. He comes in, he pitches. Maybe he throws 5 strong innings. That he gets the win in the biggest game of the year. Story writes itself. But we've seen that. I can remember Pittsfield had an NECBL team back a while ago. Dan Duquette owned it. Right. And I can remember looking at teams that he would bring in and saying, this team's going to be good. And that team couldn't get out of its way. A couple times he had teams with a bunch of guys like from Holy Cross and smaller D1 schools who played really well all year and were in the playoff hunt until the very end. So you really, for most of these kids, the adjustment to the wood bat is the biggest thing. And some of them adjust quickly. Some of them don't adjust at all.
Yeah, we forget about that. We forget about the wood bat. That's the difference. That's why they're in this league, to get the experience with the wood bat too. And we forget about what effect that has on a team and what effect that has on some of these kids that are hitting with wooden bats for the first time, maybe ever. So it's interesting enough that you bring that up, because that is a huge thing that sometimes we forget about, but the coaches don't forget about.
And it's a huge thing for pitchers too, Tom, because all of a sudden, they can throw on the hands. They can throw a pitch on the fists that's going to saw off a wood bat, right, or and not do anything. But if you do that to a guy with a composite bat or a metal bat, he's still going to fist that ball maybe into the corner for a double.
Yep, it's a lot different. And that's the one thing about this league is the pitchers pitching to contact, coming inside, doing things like that without, a lot of them are afraid to do that in this league. They're afraid to do it in any level, but in this league, especially when they first get in there, they want to blow it by you and try to impress the scouts that way rather than pitch, rather than strategize when they're on the mound. So I think it's going to be interesting to see the time of games this year, right? We're used to the pitch clock now with the major leagues, and we're getting used to it. The time of games in this league hasn't been bad over the last few years, but like any league, it always bogs down around the 7th inning.
It does. I think a lot of the D1 schools have pitch clocks in their leagues, so I think that at least the pitchers are used to throwing more rapidly and hopeful. I can't imagine that this league is ever going to go to a pitch clock, because I can't imagine that anybody can really afford to put them in and
that's just
hire the personnel to do it.
Yeah, right.
But I think a lot of the pitchers are more used to throwing quickly.
What about the future, no pun intended, in this league? When I started to cover it, 4 teams: Martha's Vineyard, Torrington, Seacoast in New Hampshire, which is and Nashua. Martha's Vineyard is still alive in the NECBL, but the other 2 franchises are gone, and Nashua is the lone remaining one. Then all of a sudden, after 2 or 3 years, it increased to 10. It went up to 6, then to 10. And Pittsfield was part of that. And then I think they got too big and allowed too many franchises in that couldn't sustain themselves, and then have had to go back the other way. And now we're at 8. Again, it's got to be the right fit in terms of the ownership group. It's got to be something sustainable, and it's got to be something, I think, with a good facility. Because that's the one thing that separates this league from some of the other leagues. The majority of the teams in this league, the majority, not all, but the majority play in good stadiums.
In old minor league
ballparks.
Minor league ballparks. And even as old as Wacona Park has been, it's unlike, and I'll compare, it's probably its biggest comparison would be Bowlins Field and Westfield. But at least Wacona Park has history. And in 2 years, when you come back down to visit, there will likely be a brand new grandstand. Because they're in the process of doing a major study, of what they want to do. Do they want to renovate it, or do they want to tear it down and start over again? That will be determined probably sometime during the course of this season. But on them, I will say that they managed last summer to make chicken salad out of chicken poop. Considering that, in April, they found out they could not use the grandstand. They put in some the bleacher sections they put in foul territory are the coolest seats anywhere in college baseball.
Yeah.
It's like you can look down and see the tonsils of the hitter. And I've sat in those a couple of times just for fun, and it's a really, really cool seat.
Yeah, the league has certainly seen its fair share of good facilities over the years. And yes, Wacona Park may be a little, run down, but it's historic, and we love having it in the league, of course. And for you guys, you've been part of the league, obviously, as I mentioned, since its beginning here when Pittsfield joined, and Tom, you said in 2011. What have been your best stories and best memories from covering the Futures League?
Well, I'm just going to go to last. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Howard. You go ahead.
I'm just going to go to. I'm going to go to last year, when the Brockton Rocks came to town and signed a young man for one day. He has since passed on, but that was one of the great days, that I had been around.
I would have to say, this is tough. The first night of this league wasn't in Nashua, wasn't a big deal. There may be 200 people in the stands. It was drizzly. It was rainy, the whole bit. Of course, for me, Tom, how could I forget Tom King bobblehead night, right? That's got to be a huge memory for me. But I'll tell you what, the best game I've seen is last year's championship game. There's two that stand out. There was a game in the finals. I believe the year was 2016, when Nashua was down to its final strike with 2 outs and nobody on. And Mickey Gasper, who right now is in AAA with the Yankees, was down 0-2 and worked a walk. And then Ryan Sullivan hit a 2-run homer to tie the game against Worcester in the opening night of the finals at Holman Stadium. That's one huge memory. Nashua went on to win. They won that night. They won in extra innings that night, and on a close play at first base, in which I thought the Nashua runner was out. He wasn't. They called him safe. And the other, for me, had to be, and I there's a lot of, obviously, tons of stories in this league, and Howard's is very emotional. Mine are more, I guess, in tune with what's going on the field. And last year's championship game in Vermont, the whole series after game 1, which was a blowout, the whole series was really something else. But last year in Nashua is in Vermont, and they're down a run going in top of the 9th. Vermont's got its best pitcher on the mound to close it out, and Nashua gets a 2-run home run to take the lead, and then Vermont loads the bases in the bottom of the 9th with their best hitters up and 2 pop-ups to end the game. And I'm right next to Chris English, who's the owner of Vermont, who used to own the National Pride, the independent league team, and he was just stunned. The emotion in that game, to me, it was a watershed mark for the Nashua franchise, because the ownership, I think, for the first time, because the owner owns 2 teams. He owns Worcester, which I always think that is his baby, because that was his original team. I think for the first time, he really became the Nashua owner on that night. And that, because he was just, incredibly happy, and just thrilled that they had a fan bus come up and everything else. And I think that was fresh in my mind, yes, but for me, that was one of the biggest memories that I'll take away, after whenever I'm done covering this league. that night in Vermont, that Friday night in Vermont, I think it was August 11th to 12th, was certainly a big memory.
What is it about that? I've been to Centennial Field more times than I care to count, between a championship game in the Futures League and all the years that the Expos were in the New York Penn League, and they would play the old Pittsfield Mets in games, and I would always go up to
the Pittsfield Mets. Yeah.
Whenever they opened, I would go up there. But it's funny, the championship game in 2021 had the same kind of buzz, because that was the year that, again, we talk about how Vermont has dominated the league. They ran roughshod over the league that year, and they end up playing a Pittsfield team in the championship series that was down to a bunch of guys from schools like Nichols, all the small Division III schools in New England, and it was an ace versus ace. Arguably one of the best pitchers has been in the league the last 3 years has been Pittsfield's Isaiah Mestry, and it was a pitch for pitch. Nobody could get anything done. Finally, Vermont eked out a couple of runs. Top of the ninth, it's a 1-run game. The winning run is at first base, and Pittsfield cannot push it around. And it was just one of those great baseball nights. Bill Lee was in the house in Burlington.
Wow, yeah.
And I remember talking to him for something else, and he's saying, "So what team are you rooting for here? Your adopted hometown, which is Burlington, because he lives in Vermont, or the place where you pitched in Double-A for 2 years with the Pittsfield Red Sox?"
Yeah.
And obviously he was rooting for Vermont, but he had several friends who played on that Double-A team, who settled in Pittsfield, and we had long conversations about them. But somehow that series in Vermont, and that was with the team, that Pittsfield team just kind of got on a roll. And I don't know if the last time you were in town, but going back to one of the independent pro teams, they had an Indian head on a pedestal that was outside the ballpark, and they would take it on the road in the playoffs because it became their good luck. It became kind of their good luck talisman.
The thing about Centennial Field, it's the fans. They pack the place. That's a very popular team, and I don't know what the New York Penn League team drew, how they drew. I imagine they drew pretty well, because look,
you're
in an area that's, I don't want to say isolated. I mean, that was the first time I'd ever been there, and for the 3.5-hour drive, it may be a little while until I go there again. The All-Star game I know is going to be there this year, but it's the fans there. The fans are really into it. They are really into it there, and I think that's it's a gold mine. It really is. It was a great coup for the league to get that franchise.
It is, and I'm surprised they did. I'm surprised that it has been as successful, in the sense that people there were really angry when Major League Baseball contracted teams,
right?
And the Vermont and the Lake Monsters were one of the teams that were contracted. And there was talk
with the Lowell Spinners.
Yeah. And over and across, and just across the border in Troy, New York, the same thing with the Tri-City Valley Cats.
Yes.
But
my hometown
I'm surprised that they didn't go independent pro to start, just because they were so used to the one thing. And then would the community that had been so used to high caliber professional baseball in the New York Penn League take to this level of baseball? And the fact that they have tells me all I need to know about the people in Burlington.
But you have to remember something too, Howard. we get a little carried away, I think, with the New York Penn League. Obviously, the caliber is a little bit is better, but a lot of the players, same age, right?
Not much older, no,
Not
absolutely.
much older. So these are kids that are drafted. So that, in other words, and Vermont has done a great job of getting good players. So I think there's a couple of things. One, you're hard pressed if you talk to fans as they're leaving or coming into the ballpark. Some of them in the Futures League, they think they're watching pro kids. They don't know. They're just here to see a baseball game and be entertained. So that a lot of them aren't, the diehards, the season ticket holders, the whole bit. They know the deal. The people who read you and I, they know the deal. But the casual fan doesn't know the deal. And the casual fan in Vermont will say, and the casual fan in Nashua will say, there's a game tonight. It's a beautiful night. Let's go to the ballpark. See what I mean? They won't know. They don't know.
Oh, and I think, that's, that's the charm of it. And I think that is why the league, the teams in this league all operate, they do a lot more of the minor league entertainment game stuff than you see elsewhere. And I think that helps, and that helps also.
Right. The fans that are going to Vermont to get all that entertainment, they don't know the difference because it's the same stuff they've always seen. It's the
and
same.
Tuesday night dollar hot dog night.
Right.
Which my oldest child who lives in Winooski will go because she loves dollar hot dog night.
There you go. Yep. So I do too, especially when it comes into the press box on Holman, but I can't eat a lot of those hot dogs these days.
No.
Not good for me.
Yeah, hot dog hysteria in Vermont is real. They love it up there.
Oh, they love it up there. I mean, I got there maybe when I went last year for about I got there about 45 minutes before the first pitch. And I just kind of took a walk around the ballpark. You could tell the fans, the food, the whole bit, they were there to just enjoy the whole night and enjoy the entertainment. And I was quite taken with the place.
Yeah, it's an incredible ballpark, and they're doing a great job in Vermont. And as you guys said, those are two great stories to have. Last year's championship was unbelievable. And Howard, you talked about Evan Franz, the one-day contract for the Rocks last year. It was an incredible story, and we love being part of that here in the Futures League. And I want to ask you guys generally here, one thing about summer ball in the league is obviously these guys are coming in and trying to develop their craft each year when they join these teams. How important do you believe the Futures League and other summer ball leagues are to these players, and to have for these players to go back to school, hopefully better players at the end of the day?
Oh, I think it's big. But I think the funny thing, Owen and Howard, is that when these guys get here, they don't know what to expect, a lot of them. They're not sure. Okay, are they here to just kind of just play baseball and enjoy the summer? Or are they here to play serious baseball and try to win? And I think when they're doing the latter, that's when they develop more as players. Because when they're here just to say, okay, I played this summer, satisfied, almost like satisfying the quota for their coach, yes, coach, I played summer ball. But if you go to a franchise that says, hey, you're here to play, but you're also here to win because that's what we want to do. And it's a fine line in these summer leagues for a lot of these franchises to figure out what they want their players to do, and for the players to figure out what they want to do and what they want to get out of playing summer ball. And I think for some franchises, they'll just come and play. And for other franchises, they know they'll come and play, but they know that if they want to keep playing and, kind of showcase themselves a little bit, they play to win. And I think that's the best way to do it. And that's how they go about it. And I think that's why these leagues are important. I mean, the leagues are scouted. Now the draft is a little different now. The draft is a little later, So it may make a difference maybe here and there. Obviously there's kids drafted every year out of this league, but they're not drafted early, so they don't have to make a big decision whether to sign or not. So they're I think for these kids, if they come in with the attitude that it's serious and they want to play it, which isn't easy for them to do because they're college kids. It's summertime, no class, no school. They can enjoy life a little bit. No pressure in terms of their college season to try to produce in a conference tournament, things like that. But when they get here in Nashua, they find out, well, you know what? You're here to play ball, but you're also here to win. And that's the mentality that they try to produce. And I think that the kids get more out of that than they do if they just come to, play an occasional game every 2 or 3 days.
What's really, you bring that, the way you mentioned that, the way I look at it, it's a calendar thing. I think for when the season starts in late May through much of June, it's pretty much we're playing and having fun. The calendar flips. It's the first week of July. It's almost July 10th. The teams kind of know who's good and who isn't. And I think that's where you find if you think your team's got a shot, that you really kick it in. And the teams that aren't playing quite as well kind of just start running out the string.
I'll give you a perfect example with Nashua last season. It was around June 28th, 29th, somewhere around there. They had to play a doubleheader with Worcester. I think it was Worcester. And it was one of them was a makeup. So the first game was at, I think 3 or 4. I think it was at 3. First game's at 3:30. And it's a hot, sunny day, not much wind. The last place that anybody wanted to be, I think, for Nashua was on a baseball field. And the first game, they played like it. And they got beat. It was over with by, I think they got mercy ruled. So the game was over early. Now Kyle Jackson, the Nashua manager, former Red Sox farmhand, he's a big teacher with these kids in terms of how they play and but he also gives them a lot of rope and saying, it's up to you to learn. It's up to you to figure it out. He went to them after that game. He's not a yeller. He's not a screamer. But he's a teacher. And he went to them and he said, guys, we can do this one of 2 ways. You can come here, relax, just the way I described it before. Play whenever you want to play, and we'll do it that way. And you can get results like this and look like this in front of there weren't many people in the park at that time because it was early in the day. You can look like that in front of the fans. Or you can take this seriously. You can go out there and you can play to win and you can play your best every night. How do you want to do it? Well, they came out the second game, they won that game, and they went on a streak, and that propelled them to the playoffs. But they had to make that decision, just like you said, Howard, at that particular time, the end of June. What do we want to be? And that's a big deal for these kids.
That's the way when Matt Gedman was the manager in Pittsfield. He ran his team, and that is why they were always even if they weren't a contender, always a really tough out at the end of July. You didn't want to have to play his teams at that point because you knew you were going to get, a real effort. We've seen games like when there are teams that are 10 games out of the last playoff spot who are really just kind of mailing it in. And that's what you don't want to have to see. And I think the best managers in this league are the guys who can push those right buttons.
Yep. That's it. And get into the mentality of the kids and take themselves back to when they were their age and they were young, looking to get drafted, looking to get scouted and things like that, and try to try to get into the minds of these kids and get them thinking that way. And I think it works. But I mean, look, it's summer ball. You got to give them that kind of choice.
Which is why I'm looking forward to what happens this summer here, because I've known Chad Shade since he's 3 years old. I work with his dad at one of the Pittsfield radio stations, and we go back a long way. And he was always, as a high school player and as a college player, and in his 2 years that he spent with the Suns, arguably as hard a playing player, if that is a proper phrase, as anybody. I mean, the year he was a two-sport guy at Springfield College and really busted up his leg badly playing football. He was the quarterback in a triple option offense. So you can imagine what happens to quarterbacks on that. But the next summer, he was there, and even though he couldn't play because he was still recovering from the surgery, was in the dugout every day, being part of the team. And I suspect that is what's going to translate with this team this summer. Whether or not they can win games will depend on the kids in the uniforms and whether they can hit the curveball. But we'll find out.
Yeah,
but I think they will be a team that doesn't not play, 9 innings every day.
Trouble with the curve. That's the whole key. Yep.
Yeah, and you talk about all these kids that talked about Shade, who's played in the league for a couple of years, and the New England baseball scene and how it's produced so much talent. And that's evident in the Futures League by guys playing in the big leagues like Jeremy Pena and Jason Voschler, Aaron Savali. We mentioned Chris Shaw earlier. What is it like to cover those guys in the Futures League in college or even in high school as early as then, and seeing what they've become and seeing these guys make the majors and just see what they make of their baseball career?
Well, let me start with a guy who didn't play very long in Pittsfield and didn't play what he's known for now, and that's the Washington Nationals' Cade Cavalli, first round draft pick, out for the year with Tommy John. Hurt his elbow at training camp. When he came to Pittsfield, I think he threw like 2 innings. And he was primarily a DH and a third baseman because he couldn't throw because he had just come off of a big bat problem. But now here he is, arguably the number one, at least until before his surgery, the number one pitching prospect in the league, in the Nationals organization. And I catch up to him the last couple of years. I was able to catch up to him twice in Worcester when he was at AAA Rochester, and just, he hasn't really changed as a kid. He's still still somewhat quiet and all that, but he was fun to have around in the short time he was in Pittsfield. And now he's on the cusp. But it's just funny because he never and I'm sure, I don't know if Tom remembers, but he never really pitched here. He he had like 2 or 3 two outings in relief, spent most of his time either playing third base or DHing, which he liked doing more, because pitching is work. And, he just loved in the summer to come out and swing the bat. But now here he is, hopefully he will recover. And now that Tommy John surgery is so relatively easy, hopefully he'll come back better.
It's different for me. Shaw was a big player, but Nashua hasn't had many, anybody reach that kind of level. The closest one now is Mickey Gasper, who in my mind is the best 2-strike hitter I've ever seen. He was the league's offensive player of the year in 2016. The thing with Mickey is a position defensively. He's small, catcher build, has worked a lot on his catching skills, which really weren't honed in when he was with Nashua. They moved him around, catcher here, first base there, DH here, and now he's in Scranton. He's in Scranton with the Yankees, and it's a question now of look, he could get a phone call with the way, if they have catching issues, he could get a phone call and be up to the majors in a heartbeat. And he's a local kid. He doesn't live, his family's not around here anymore. They lived it. They were, I covered him in high school when he played in Merrimack, New Hampshire. So, Pena, I remember briefly, but he only played a couple of games at Holman Stadium. I mean, he wasn't with Nashua. But it's amazing to see. Look, I go back to it again. I'll go back to it. A 4-team league, right? 4 teams in 2011, in the summer of 2011. Season was over with by like August. I mean, the finals were over with by August 4th or whatever. Who would have thought that you would have, an NLCS MVP playing out, who played in the Futures League? Back then, you never would have thought that. Never. This was a D2, again, a majority of the players in this league were D3 kids. And, it was a place for them to play where they couldn't make any other college league. So to see something like this, to me, is absolutely it's mind-boggling. I never would have expected it 12 years ago.
And the funniest thing about our conversation today is that Pittsfield and Nashua are over the course of the baseball lifetime are so incredibly linked together.
So tied. I wrote a column about it a few years ago. It's unbelievable.
Just for the people who don't know, going back to when Pittsfield had a team in the NECBL, Dan Duquette decided to sell a portion of it to a group of guys who owned the independent league team in Nashua. Right. And at that time, I believe they were the Nashua American Defenders.
Yeah, they didn't last a full season.
Well, no, but they bought the Pittsfield team and changed the name in Pittsfield to the Pittsfield American Defenders for their last year in the NECBL. The next year, I believe they were locked out of your stadium in Nashua and ended up moving the team to Pittsfield, where they became the Pittsfield Colonials for 2 years. And I have long argued that the best baseball writ large I've ever seen were those 2 years, because they were grown-ups playing the game. I'm sure you must remember Jared Edmondson from New Hampshire, argued maybe the best hitter I ever saw at Wacona. He and Jay Payton with the Mets, maybe the two best bats I've ever seen. So then 2 years, they fold up, and then 2 years later, Pittsfield's in the Futures League with Nashua again. We are I'll go one further. The year going back to 1985, the Pittsfield Cubs, the Chicago Cubs moved their AA team to Pittsfield for 4 years.
And Nashua had the Nashua Pirates.
Their first series was against Nashua.
Yep.
And opening day was a day game, 6,000 people at Wacona Park. They had a parade up North Street with the players, all that. They played the next night. It's New England. It's April. It's 30 degrees. and I remember the Pirates relief pitchers made a fire in the bullpen in one of those big metal garbage cans to stay warm. And all I can remember is in the post game, Felix Fermin in the Nashua clubhouse kept saying, "It's cold," which I think is all he knew at the time, but it was frigid. So Pittsfield and Nashua have been part of baseball in New England, been kind of like, members of the same family forever.
Right, with 2 historic parks. And that's, and that's the other thing that links them, the 2 most historic ballparks in New England. So it's been that way. The Defenders, it was just a failed. They bought the National Pride, who had been, basically in an independent league. It's to bring it back into the context of the Futures League. It depends on the business model. the independent league model is not very good for New England because you've got to be able to pack the place to the hilt of 3,000 to 4,000 a night just to break even because of the workman's comp and the insurance and everything, all the overhead for an independent league team that you don't have for a summer collegiate league team. So Nashua, after the Defenders were locked out, and that's another story for another show, for another podcast. But the next year, the next year in 2010, there was no team in Nashua, no team at Holman Stadium. And Drew Weber, the owner of the Lowell Spinners, decided to have a expo, where fans could come and meet the players and sign up for tickets and things like that. And what they did, I talked to Drew Weber, and Drew Weber said to me, he said, I can promise you there'll be a team in Nashua here next year. And I'm like, okay, what's it going to be? Because at the time, we never thought a summer collegiate league team would work here. And sure enough, Drew Weber, that's what he did. The Spinners decided to put one there. And the general manager, Tim Ballman of the Spinners, the president, lived right down the street from me. He lives, he used to live just a little ways down. And so, that's how it all evolved.
Hold on, we'll get right back to the Futures, but first, we want to share a message from our friends at 78 Sports. Do you have kids playing baseball or softball? We all know practice time is limited, especially here in New England, not to mention the cost of lessons and cage time can add up very quickly. Save yourself time and money by giving your kids what they need to work on their game at home. Our friends at 78 Sports can help you put together the perfect at-home training setup. Whether you want to start small with just a tee and a net, or looking to set up a full cage with turf and a pitching machine, they have you covered. And I've used their stuff before. I've seen their facilities. They definitely cover everything. The team at 78 Sports design and install hundreds of at-home and commercial sports training facilities. So let them help you find the perfect setup for your space. Visit the 78 Sports website at 78sports.com. That's SEVENTY, the number 8, sports.com. For a limited time only, by just mentioning Back to the Futures, you'll receive a 10% discount off your order. That's SEVENTY, number 8, sports.com. Now, back to your regularly scheduled programming.
All right, I want to transition here. We talked a lot about the Futures League, which is great, but I want to transition into your guys' backgrounds and ask specifically. We talked about best stories in the Futures League, but I want to ask about what was your best or your favorite story that you've ever done in your illustrious careers?
Oh boy. You're talking to somebody who's covered 10 Super Bowls.
I know.
So that's going to be it.
Yeah.
I mean, overall, you lump them all together. I never thought I'd be able to do one, and I've done 10. Thanks to the companies, the two companies that own the paper agreed to send me and everything else. So I'd say, covering those, I mean, multiple high school, a lot of high school stuff and everything else. And then, and some small college. I have a more of a limited area than Howard does. Howard expands a little bit. But I would say those things, as well as covering the independent league Nashua Pride with Butch Hobson as the manager, probably the 2000 season, the best, I would argue, the best professional season that baseball season that Nashua has ever seen. I would say that year was magical in terms of baseball. They won the championship. They played at the championship was won in Somerset, New Jersey, Somerset Township, that area. Bridgewater, New Jersey is the actual location. The Somerset Patriots, who are now in affiliated ball, as the Yankees AA team. But that year, covering Butch Hobson as the National Pride manager, who I had covered a few games with when he was the Red Sox manager, doing that. And then, obviously the Futures League, those things, but 10 Super Bowls, I just, for me, I'm almost speechless at covering those because I was in awe every year. You always think, oh, it's old hat, you do it all the time, it's not a big deal. It's what's one, if the first one, obviously, I was just enamored and thrilled to be covering those Super Bowls with the Patriots playing as year 10, which was in Atlanta back in 2019. And as I was in year 1, which was the Bill Parcells Super Bowl when he took the Patriots to the Super Bowl in February of 1997. So you put all that stuff together, and that's probably it.
Never been to a Super Bowl. If I'm professional highlighting it like that, the being at Fenway when the Red Sox won in 2013 was pretty spectacular. It was the first time I had been there for a clinching game, because the 2 previous World Series that I could get to, that I was credentialed for, ended on the road.
Right.
And I was, and the company would let me go, but would not let me travel like that. And I could understand that.
Right.
I was at the final NCAA Division I Final Four, played in an arena, which was in New Jersey, when UMass played, when Calipari's team with Marcus Camby played there. The next year they started playing in football stadiums. So,
right.
So we were all kind of lucky.
Stadiums. Yep.
But one of my favorite things that I've done happened during the pandemic year, when everything was shut down. And as I'm sure you were, Tom, you were looking for things to do. I ended up doing an oral history of the first time Division III Williams went to the Final Four. I talked to their coach. I talked to the opposing coach. I talked to a bunch of players on both teams, and and didn't write a story. Just ran quotes and stuff. And it was and I learned things that I didn't really know. I was talking to one player who was regaling me on a story from their I believe it was their Elite 8 game that they played in Williamstown. And this player is now, I believe, the corporation counsel for the city of New York, and had been an assistant U.S. attorney involved in prosecuting mob and drug guys. So, most of those guys, who go to those kind of schools, go off and, as the NCAA likes to joke, they go off and turn professional in something other than their sport. But these guys,
as the cheer goes, that's all right, that's okay. You'll all work for us someday.
Yeah, exactly. But he was telling me, they were playing a team that they had played like the year before, and had beaten them on the road. And I didn't remember the little layup line pregame altercation where there were a little bit of pushing and shoving and a lot of talking, and I believe it was Rowan University, and Williams ended up beating them and ended up going to the Final Four. And the interviews I had with players, 96, 97, like almost 30 years later, and these guys still remember everything. I barely remember what I had for breakfast.
Right, exactly.
But so many of these athletes will remember plays, will remember pitches. And the other thing I remember on the field stuff was the night that the Pittsfield Mets won the 1997 New York Penn League Championship on a walk-off pinch hit base hit by a player named Kevin McCarthy, 3rd-round pick of the Mets. He retired after that game.
When you're on top, right?
his career had been like, he was a low 200s hitter through his entire Mets career. And I've not been able to talk to him. I have tried a couple of times to reach out, never got back to it, and so forth. But he said, I was told, what am I going to do that's better than hitting a walk-off to win a championship?
The one local story that I always keep remembering that I did, and this is kind of pretty much right up your alley, Howard, but your Division III schools are a little bit more established. When Riviere went co-ed in the early 90s, Riviere University in Nashua, and there was also Daniel Webster College. Both schools decided to go all in NCAA D3, and they didn't quite know how to do it. I think Riviere knew how to do it more than Daniel Webster did, and Daniel Webster was ahead of Riviere in doing it. And that was kind of you cover a lot of high school stuff, and I hadn't really gotten into hadn't started covering the Patriots, things like that yet. So all those years in the 90s and early 2000s, I was trying to kind of, I don't want to say, publicize. I was trying to get people interested in what these athletes could do, because a whole new level, and Howard, you'll agree with this, of Division III, and this plays right into the Futures League, Division III sports, a whole new level has cropped up over the years, right? With a lot of these small colleges upgrading their athletic programs. Major factor, I think, in supplying the Futures League with a lot of players over the years. But in 2007, I decided I wanted to do a day in the life of a small college athlete. No scholarship. They had to go to class, right? They had to go to class. They had to get good grades, the whole bit. And so I followed this kid who was a basketball player. His name was Jeff Carpenter. I followed him all around. It was President's Day, but the school, they had school that day. There was no holiday for them. And I met him in his dorm at 8:00 in the morning. I think it was 5 below. And I went through and sat in on 3 classes. And the feeling that I had, and then I went through the 3 classes. I ate lunch with them. I ate dinner with them. I went to and then his practice was at night, and it ended at 10:30. So his day went all the way through, and they were in the GNAC tournament that year, and they won it. And it was they won the conference, the Great Northeast Athletic Conference, and went to the NCAAs, where they got pummeled by Keene State. But it was the best season Riviere University basketball has ever had. They haven't come close to it since. But I remember sitting in the 4:00 class, and the same feelings that I got when I was a student was like, okay, when is this class going to end so I can get out of here? It was the same feeling. It all came back to me, but I'll never forget doing that. It was a fun story to do, and I enjoyed it very much, and it was very enlightening too. See what these kids go through.
One of my favorite all-time, I did it several times, was as Williams College is a preeminent basketball power in Division III.
Yes. And
I have been to 5 Final Fours with them. And the best part of the weekend is the way they had done it for decades is teams would arrive on Wednesday in Salem, Virginia, where the Final Four had been for like 25 years. And Wednesday they would get, Thursday they would practice at the Civic Center and then do media and take a team picture and all that. And the best part of the week is Thursday, the media day, is also the first day of the NCAA the Division I tournament.
Right.
And there's nothing as much fun as watching college basketball with college basketball players, because they get what's going on, even though they're at a completely different level. And it was always the best part of the weekend is spending Thursday in the press room, because there were like 4 TVs set up, and watching all the different games.
Well, there's a lot of different things that we've been, able to see and do and everything else. And it's, you never take it for granted. That's for sure.
And people ask, because I am not a teenager anymore, I get asked frequently, when are you going to stop? And I say, what? Well, the 2 things I say, one is something my wife always says: why would I quit now? I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But the other part of it is, and it goes directly to what we've been talking about most of the time, is I get to watch kids play games. Even Chris Sale as a kid, relatively speaking, I get to watch people play games for a living. We all work hard. Our deadlines have changed over the years because of the media and what we do. Fortunately, I think unlike your paper, my deadline's still like 11 o'clock at night. So we get most everything that we cover during the course of a day in. But we all work really hard at what we do. But ultimately, you get to go to a Super Bowl. You get to go to a World Series. You get to go to a state championship game. You get to go cover a Futures League championship game. That's not work.
No, it's not rocket science either, right? It's not.
Oh God. No.
I always tell people I'd never make it in corporate America, So no, that's just it, And for me now, it's changed because we're online, and we only have, basically we have a weekly now that I produce the content for. Early in the week, I get all that done. And my focus now is putting together the online section and covering everything locally online. And, it's if I had to go back to a deadline, it would be, it's been 3 years. It would be an adjustment. There's no question about it. It would be an adjustment. I remember, I think it was the Valley News asked me one night a couple of years ago, yeah, can you get us a story by 8:30? And I was like, yeah, because I was helping them out. When one of their teams was down here, we were trading stories. Valley News up in the Hanover, Lebanon area, right near the Vermont border. And I was like, I got to think about that. Can I do that? Do I have enough time? Things like that. So it's a little different for me now.
It's interesting because I think only the Globe has a later deadline than we do in Massachusetts. I could be wrong about that.
Yeah,
I know the Herald's got a really early deadline for their print product, and everything else is online. We got lucky 5 or 6 years ago. You and I have talked about this before. We got lucky several years ago. We were sold by one of those big, hedge fund chains,
right?
And we're now locally owned.
Yep.
And the people who and they want us to be, the best small paper in America, which, and maybe win a Pulitzer Prize like the Eagle did 40 years ago for its editorial policies. But I am fortunate in that regard. Everything is instant online, but we still have a print product that our ownership cares about.
Yeah, and that's huge, definitely. So the coverage of the Futures League has definitely changed from my standpoint. I used to stay at the stadium an hour and a half after a game and get a story and write as the game goes on. And now I don't do that. Now I just come home and do it and then post it, and it shows up on the website at after midnight. And that's how things are done now. And it worked out for me covering Vermont. The Vermont game, the final game, because I didn't have to write it right away. I got back in the car and I moved 3.5 hours back to Nashua. I think I went to bed around 4 a.m, but I got everything done in terms of the story and the whole bit, and got back here around 1:30 and was able to write and give it justice, give it what it needed. And that's the only advantage I can see right now is with the online. I do miss the daily newspaper. I miss the daily paper. I still get a Globe. I still get it in my hands every morning and read it. Although it's a lot of it's feature content because their deadlines are so early for the edition that we get here in Nashua. So, but that's and the other paper closest to us, the Manchester Union Leader, their deadlines are notoriously early. I mean, they're barely able to get anything that happens the night before in the print product that arrives here in Nashville. So that gives us that in some ways that gives us an advantage with the online. So, but I do miss the print product, that's for sure.
Yeah, the print product is certainly, it feels like a thing of the past, but it's not. It's still going. It's
right.
fading slowly, ever so slowly. And
Definitely.
you guys have talked about it during this episode plenty, but not only do you cover, of course, the Futures League and the pros, but you cover high school sports too. And we know how much that means to these students to get in front of you guys, to get in front of media members and have their games covered and have themselves in the spotlight even before some of them take it to the next level. So what has it meant to both of you to be able to cover high school sports and give these kids that chance to get into the spotlight, before they even step foot in college?
Well, for me, it's it's different because you're going year to year to year to year, and I've done it. I've been here 37 years, and kids that I covered in high school are now principals, athletic directors. When they get to be grandfathers, then I know I'm really in trouble, right? So it's different. But the one thing that I have come to realize more so, because the kids are names. They're names that you write, and they change every year. The teams change every year. And what you have to try to keep in mind is the human element. They're people, they're kids, they're people that you're covering. And unfortunately, when you're typing up a season preview capsule, you're just typing up a bunch of names. You don't think about the kids and the people that are associated with it. You don't think about the effect of the words that you write and how that feels. And the one thing I think I've come to realize over the last 5, 6, 7 years is how much the community is in tune with what we write when we cover the high school games, and how much the coaches and the kids appreciate and look forward to the coverage and look to see if you're there at that game. You know what I mean? And for me, it's a lot different. I'm now a one-man department. So one-person department. Howard's a member of his staff. I'm a one-person department. So when the kids, when I show up and the kids are thinking, this has got to be a big game. And so that's lost on me a little bit until these last few years, because you don't want the names to be just the job. They're people, and you've got to take that into account.
We have a philosophy to see everyone we can early. And then once we kind of check off the boxes, like in the spring, I'm basically the baseball guy. So I'll check off most of the teams, or we'll check, and fortunately we've seen most of the bottom teams like in the first week or so now. And then as the season goes on, we'll just start showing up at I hesitate to use the term better, but for the teams with the winning records.
Yeah, that's what once the teams are not winning, you don't cover them that much. You don't see them that much.
No. And what the fun, and I'll relate a story about, being out and about with you. Is maybe 8, 9 years ago, a little less, covering a high school football playoff game. And one of the schools is the local power, and they're playing a Central Mass team in a semifinal game. So a kid had fumbled, trying to score, and they recovered it, and looked like curtains. This team ends up coming back and runs out of time to complete the comeback. So I wrote, so my story I wrote, for so-and-so, it could have been, it looked like it was going to be a really rough afternoon. He fumbled the ball away, blah, 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 blah. Turns out he catches a big touchdown pass. They almost win. He talked to me about this. He says, yeah, I fumbled it. It was awful. I had to help make the comeback. 4 days later, I get an email from a woman not related to the kid who said, that was awful. You embarrassed the kid. I didn't really embarrass, and I wrote the woman back, because I will respond to people who send me critical emails.
Oh, yeah.
Who sign them. I will not write an email back to someone who wrote me an email and just said, you stink. You shouldn't have written that. If they want to sign their name,
right,
I will respond. I said, but you do understand that while, I mentioned that, I also mentioned that he did this, and it was part of why he was able to do that he made the fumble earlier, and as I do this longer, I get a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? A little more sensitive to, calling kids out in print.
Yeah.
But as I tell people all the time, that's why there's a scoreboard.
That's it,
you win, you lose, you make mistake, it happens.
Right. But the one thing I'll remember is, and Howard, you and I both dabble in the broadcast world as well. And I do games for the local education channel. And so we were doing a game, and this is when it really hit me. The impact. A man came up. I don't know who he was. I had a headset on. And I don't even know if I think we were in a break, and we were in a table in the corner of, it was a Nashua North versus Nashua South game. And he just came up to me and he said, I really want to thank you for all the high school coverage you give these kids. And I don't know who he was. He looked older. He looked more like he would be a grandfather than a father of one of the players or anything like that. And it just hit me. I mean, think of you and I, of all the kids we've covered, the impact that we've had on these kids' lives. How many times do you, and I was speechless when the guy said it to me. I just said, oh, thank you. And I kind of was like, wow, that really hit me. But think of the impact that we have. And I'm not saying this to glorify ourselves, but just think, it is what it is. How many people have walked up to you and said hi, that you're like, who are you? Right? They're kids you covered in high school, but they're all grown up now. And they go, do you remember me? And I'm like, oh yeah, right. Or whatever, and it happens to me all the time.
Oh yeah. And of course, I'm sure you get the same thing where you're now covering the kids of kids you covered.
Yeah.
Which
Sure.
is crazy. And the funny part of that is, every once in a while, I will flip-flop first names, and I might write, an older brother or sister's name.
I do that too. Put the older brother's name in instead of the other kid. Yeah. Right, exactly. Yep.
The one good thing about the pandemic was whenever my wife and I would go grocery shopping, we would wear masks.
Right. I still do.
Which helped me, because people didn't recognize me.
Right, exactly.
So I didn't have as many, but before that, I'll walk through Stop and Shop, and people will say, what's wrong with UMass? Or did you see that Wacona game? Or something, and I get that all the doggone time.
Yep, all the time.
Before we return to Back to the Futures, we want to share a message from our friends at Zorian Bat Company. Rob Zorian started the company, Zorian Bat Company, in 2003, literally out of the trunk of his car in Davie, Florida. Within 2 years, he was selling his wood bat line to Major League Baseball and continues to manufacture the highest grade wood bats for Little League all the way up to the majors. Rob Zorian, founder and president of Zorian, says, I started the company in 2003 to service all baseball players in the United States and beyond. And after 19 years, our mission has not changed. We are very excited to have the opportunity to work with the Futures League and wish all of our players and coaches a healthy and successful season ahead. For more information about Zorian, visit their website, zorianbats.com. Zorian, America's baseball brand. Now, back to the Futures. Yeah, I know those high school kids appreciate that, and those are some good stories. So obviously, Pittsfield and Nashua comes with so much baseball history. So I want to ask you guys, what has baseball meant to Nashua and Pittsfield from your perspective, from covering it from the outside and for being on the field for many of these championships, whether it's high school, college, Futures League, etc.?
Well, for Nashua, baseball is part of national history here because of it's where the American color barrier was broken with Roy Campanella and Don Newcomb. They played for the Nashua Dodgers. They were the first black professional baseball players to play in affiliated major leagues. So with the Nashua Dodgers minor league team. At the same time, Jackie Robinson was up in Montreal, and they celebrate that history here all the time. And the streets entering the stadium are named after Campanella and Newcomb. Their numbers are on the left field wall. There are murals at the entrance of the stadium of the two of them that the Silver Knights were instrumental in putting up. The Pride did some of the other things. And so baseball in Nashua is history. And there's always been a big, it doesn't exist anymore. But when the Pride first came to town, see, baseball in Nashua centers around Holman Stadium. But the people growing up here remember the days in the 50s and the 60s and the 40s when football games drew 10,000 people. They don't do that anymore, not even close here. And when the professional baseball team would come in, that would take time away from the high schools. So that was always a big debate, and ended up leading to the creation of a rectangular facility 2 exits down that, that's where they play high school football now. And that's where they should play high school football, because the stadium, the turf, can't take it. But baseball history here, the Holman Stadium, I always think, needs a team playing in the summer other than just the Legions and the Senior Babe Ruths and those types of teams. You put all that together with high school and everything else, and you're playing baseball from April to August. And I think it's a big thing for this community to have that entertainment value at Holman Stadium from the end of May to the beginning of August. I think it's something that people look forward to, but I also think that for a lot of the people here, they're very proud of the history, and they celebrate it almost all the time. When they come to Holman Stadium, you see those murals, you see what baseball has meant to this city over the years. And I think that's a huge, huge part of Nashua's history as a city.
Well, it's not just the city for us. It's, it goes back, of course, if you believe it or not, the first references of baseball in the 1700s were allegedly in Pittsfield. So you've got that. You've got two guys from northern Berkshire County, Frank Grant and Jack Chesborough, who are both in the Hall of Fame. We have had major leaguers from Dale Long to Jeff Reardon to Turk Wendell, come through Pittsfield and Berkshire County. Baseball is as ingrained in the city of Pittsfield as any sport anywhere. And it's not just because of that. I can remember I was covering the team, but 4 or 5 years ago, we had a Pittsfield team that was one pitch away from going to the Little League World Series. When every one of their regional games was on one of the ESPN networks from Bristol. One of the downtown movie theater opened up a screen and showed the games for free. And everyone, and I am told, since I was in Bristol and couldn't be there, every one of those were capacity crowds. You win a championship in baseball, you get a fire truck ride through downtown Pittsfield.
That's a big deal.
Those kids were here. Those kids were heroes. For a couple, even now, a couple of them play for the two high schools, and they're still reminded of that. And it's crazy to think that they were heroes as 12-year-olds. And I mean, that little league team, the lieutenant governor came to their big luncheon, to congratulate them all individually after it was over. And you can still, if you still go and look, if you Google on YouTube, or if you go to YouTube and look for Evan Blake, Pittsfield Little League, Bristol, Connecticut home run, you will see the craziest home run I've ever seen hit by a 12-year-old that cleared the scoreboard in straightaway center field at Bristol, Connecticut, and might still be traveling as far as I know. I don't know if it ever came down.
Here's an example of baseball and its importance. In the Nashua Pirates, the AA team, they leave at the end of the 1986 season. They weren't drawing, wasn't very well run, the whole bit. They go down to Harrisburg, which is, if you're a Pirates affiliate, that's a better location anyway. And they're still the double. I mean, I'm not sure what the affiliation is, but they're still down there in Harrisburg.
They're a Washington. They're a Washington affiliate.
Nationals, that right?
Which is almost as good, because Washington's like 2 hours away, 2.5 hours away. You hop on the interstate and you're there.
Right. And City Island was the facility. That's where the stadium is and everything else. So in 1988, Nashua hosted not the Little League World Series, but the Little League alternative at the time, the Babe Ruth level of Bambino baseball. They hosted the Bambino World Series. And that was a big deal. It was in early August of 1988. And let me tell you, it drew a lot of people. And I'm like, wow. And the organizer of that tournament, the head of the Bambino baseball in the state of New Hampshire, was a Nashua guy. His name was Fred LaJoy. He's still alive. And he was so enamored with that. And he saw that, wow, this baseball is really taken off here. And people were starving for something to see in the summertime other than the long Legion games and everything else. So he started a push to try to get a minor league team back in Nashua. And they zeroed in on who else? The New Britain Red Sox. Joe Buzis, the owner, and what Joe Buzis did was he put Nashua and Pittsfield, not Nashua and Pittsfield, but Nashua and New Britain, not the Pittsfield Red Sox, the New Britain Red Sox. So he put the two cities, kind of used Nashua as a leverage thing. It turned out that the city turned down a deal that would have cost them $200,000 to renovate Holman Stadium to get it up to minor league specs at the time in 1989, 1990, around then. And it would have been perfect, but the city alderman turned it down in a vote. Very short-sighted.
We have the same story in 2000 when a citywide vote on a civic authority that would have run a brand new stadium and kept the New York Penn League in Pittsfield was voted down.
Right.
It was, normally in those days, baseball was adjacent counties. You couldn't have the same level team. Right. But the ownership of the then Pittsfield Mets, who moved to New York, to Troy, New York, said, we'll give up our right to your county, if you can get this done. Couldn't get it done, and the rest is history.
Right. But again, and eventually 5 years later, an independent league team came to Nashua, not the Pride, wasn't very well run, was kind of shady. That also was frozen out of the stadium a year later, after 1 year. But since that time, since the mid-90s, there are only 2 years where Holman Stadium did not have a tenant, a baseball tenant. And that was 1997 and 2010. And ever since then, they have had somebody in there. I did a series on sports and politics that won an AP award. I'm not blowing my own horn, but it did win an AP award. But baseball history is important here. But just as important is the fact that you have to have a strong political backing to have a team that's not a high school or local team in your facility. And I think that having baseball like that in your facility is a safeguard to make sure, and you're finding this out, Howard, that the facility is in good condition and is suitable. Because you put those things in a lease, the city has to accommodate a team. And I think you're finding those things out. Nashua did it. Chris English, the owner in Vermont right now. Look, Holman Stadium is as much the way it is now is a lot attributed to him because he pushed to get renovations for Holman. I never would have thought there'd be an elevator at Holman Stadium to take you up a level. There's luxury suites. There's all those things that you would have never thought at the old Holman Stadium that you would have. All because of baseball. And that's the important thing. Baseball has meant so much to both communities and is so much a part of the history and so much a part of probably the future in these two areas.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's great to see it continue to produce every year with us in the Futures League. Gentlemen, that's all I got for you. This has been fantastic. Thank you both so much for joining me. And we look forward to seeing you guys in about 40 days here when the Futures League gets underway at the end of May.
It will come faster than you think.
Yep, it comes up quick.
Yes, it does.
Thanks for having us.
Tom King, Nashua Telegraph, and Howard Herman of the Berkshire Eagle. Guys, thank you so much. And this has been Season 6, Episode 9 of Back to the Futures, the official podcast of the Futures League. We have new episodes coming out every Thursday. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see everyone soon.